Hey everybody, I'm back, and tonight we're going to continue our adventure through The Children of Arc, Book 1 in the Calipar. For those of you that might be coming on for the first time, let me go ahead and read the back to you. The Children of Arc is a drama of demon slaying. It tells the tale of Richard Renovan, a man struggling to survive a dismal post-apocalyptic society in the surviving town of Arc. When mankind's predator attacks Ark for the first time, Richard learns that he and he alone possesses a weapon powerful enough to destroy these invaders. Richard must overcome his fear and regret, or else his inner demons will tear him down as Ark burns. We are on page 63. Shots rang out. Luke had been running from the stadium towards Destination 6, surrounded by a mob of people screaming and trailing behind him. When it happened, some people behind him got clipped, and he threw himself down to avoid the same fate. 2 jeeps plunged out of the 2 nearby alleys, cutting them all off. They rolled down their windows and pointed assault rifles at the crowd. Shoes scuffed Luke's head as people fell over him to escape. He started crawling forward to avoid being dogpiled to death, and as sand filled his lungs, he thought being buried alive might be inevitable. Instead, 2 gloved hands hoisted him off the ground. He and several others were dragged towards jeeps and driven right back to the stadium. The 3 parks that bordered the huge blue fortress now stunk of blood and oil. 8 squad cars had been overturned, and cops were lying dead in piles. The grass was singed where small fires had been started, now covered up with the torn remnants of the dead policemen's uniforms. The terrorists passed all of this without a glance. A large man with a nylon mask held a gun on Luke, while another man with a dirty gray beard bound his wrists with zip ties. "Sorry, but you're a little old for me," Luke said, earning himself a swift punch in the face. He felt one of his teeth come loose and spat it out with a column of blood. He turned to the large gray-bearded man and chuckled. He wouldn't let them see how utterly freaked out he was. "So how does one go about loading beasts into 2 trucks, he asks. For that, he got slugged again. Delirious now, Luke allowed them to drag him to the center of the stadium, which had now become a campsite. Survivors were being forced to their knees by gunmen and hooded with their hands still behind their backs. He noticed all the gunmen had the same tattoo, a fox head. Some had it on their biceps, others on their necks. One man at the edge of the field even had a fox head stretched over his entire face, making him look quite mad. They called themselves the White Fox. But when he turned to the trucks, he forgot all about the tattooed men and started taking in the enormous corpulent creature they had held back within the stadium. It looked very much like an alligator bombed by nuclear radiation. It was 3 sizes too large for a reptile to carry itself, and yet its legs had grown into bulky paws with bulging veins. It had scales blended of lime green and orange, green limbs, an orange neck, an orange belly, and a green tail. Its snout was blue, and its head scales were brown. Its rounded snout revealed only its top row of teeth. Its scales looked like whetstones, yet their edges were sharp like knives. Luke pictured himself leaning his head against the creature's side, only to pull it away with daggers under his skin. The only thing that allowed Luke to keep his wits was that the beast was currently sleeping, a collar around its neck. Drool leaked from its mouth, and the grass beneath it, its chin wilted. Just then, a pair of leather boots crunched down on the dying grass. Luke's eyes shot back up. Luke took in the tall man in the cowboy hat, who, incidentally, was the only one wearing mahogany. His holster held 2 handguns and 2 knives. He carried a rifle in his right hand and that remote control in his left. As the man tipped up the rim of his dorky hat, Luke saw a sharply trimmed goatee that matched the woody shade of his hair, and eyes like autumn leaves just about to fall. Luke remembered a man he had once seen at Claymore's Tavern, another handsome man, who had just been singing soulfully at the microphone, making Luke's little heart just swoon. Stepping up to the microphone with confidence, resolve, and with clear pleasure, as he teased, "That was a Southwestern classic for you crazy degenerates." When his set was done, he departed the stage with a sly grin, perhaps amazed by his own brilliance. This man was exactly that. If he were about to commit murder, he would do so with confidence, resolve, and visible pleasure. He fixed his leafy eyes on Luke and addressed Luke's captor, who was standing nearby. "You run out of hoods or something?" "Trail if I know," said the gunman. The cowboy looked from Luke to the sleeping beast. "Well, lucky you, pup. At least you have something nice to look at." He walked past Luke and reached out to pat the sleeping monster's head. "Ah, my proud beast. Still haven't thought of a name for her." Luke studied the remote in the cowboy's hand. It was metallic with blue, green, and yellow buttons and a square control panel. In the top corner, there was a little blinking green light. The cowboy yanked the remote from Luke's view. "Don't let your eyes wander, pup," the cowboy ordered. "Or else what?" Luke challenged. A moment later, he wished he hadn't. Luke forgot all about the huge beast sleeping behind him as he studied this cowboy's face. Whatever beauty he thought he'd seen in those leafy eyes wilted in favor of a steely, penetrating stare. Luke had met enough of Bart's business partners to understand the resolution that look signified. Just then, the cowboy had chosen his next victim. Something roared in Luke's ears, and he let out a soundless gasp, crashing into one of the thugs as he tried to escape the beast laying behind him. Its eyes were half open, its body half risen from the ground. Its jaw was stretched in a reeking yawn. The cowboy approached with his remote control and hit the green button, while the thug forced Luke back to his position on the grass. Luke watched the beast wince, as if in pain, eyes fluttering, and sink back down to sleep. A blinking green light shone between the scales of its shoulder. The cowboy leaned in close to the monster, looking between the slits of his closing eye, and when he was certain it was asleep, he hung the remote on his holster, sharply turned, and walked back to the center of the field. Scene break. Let me address some comments real quick. Let me see how we're doing on Facebook and YouTube. We are in night 6, everybody. Night 6. Thank you to my regulars who are here. Oh, pardon me. Okay. Everybody, don't be shy to leave a comment. I am going to share this out and make sure that we have some people joining us, some people who would probably like to join in on the fun. And I'm also going to post the link to buy the book. If you're new and you like what you hear, you are welcome to check out the book on the Amazon. Okay. Cool. Alrighty, let's continue. Whoops. Forgot something. Alrighty. Back to our story. Richard spotted 3 hornets breaking off from the swarm above him. Their little fiery eyes followed every step he took. Their fluttering wings held them in the air. He had little time to think. 2 were golden, with that green poison dripping from their stingers, melting the concrete over 30 feet below them. 1 was red, with just a razor for a stinger. He had to take out the 2 golden ones first, but the red hornet was flying at him the fastest. Richard minded his footwork. For once, he wasn't just holding steel. He was holding a pink relic oozing red steam from its eye. It rose around him like an armor of smoke, yet the hornets were undiscouraged. Their salivating jaws clapped together as they came within inches of his face, just like Brian's logs. His big brother had set all manner of traps for him once, chucked every item he could find at him. Richard had come home many a day with scraped elbows and bruised arms. Once he'd even come home with a slashed temple. He'd hated every minute of it, but he'd learned how to dodge. The first of the hornets reached him, but he ducked and rolled. When he rose, he sliced upward, and the edge of his blade met one of the golden hornets. Bullets had bounced off them. Steel had shattered against them, yet this artifact blade cut right through the golden hornet like it was a soft potato. It fell to the ground in 2 pieces as Richard spun and slashed right, clipping the second of the 2 golden hornets. When they were both on the ground, their parts began to flash like spark plugs. Richard winced and covered his eyes, and the red hornet stinger slashed his temple. He staggered and looked up as the little beast flew back to the swarm, the rest not daring to fly down after him. At his feet, no longer sparkling, were 2 mounds of sludge, the remains of mankind's predator. Blood dripped down Richard's face, and yet he took a breath. He hadn't just killed 2 beasts. He'd frightened the whole swarm. A roar then echoed across Main Street. Richard turned to see the elk beast staring him down all the way from 10th. He gritted his teeth, swearing to himself that this thing was next. The sword's aura swirled around his arm as he flexed his muscle, and he bounded down Main Street. Getting closer, the elk seemed to grow larger and larger until he felt a pang of fear, stopping at 9th Street, taking a battle stance, and gagging on the stench of toxin coming from the Claymore Circle. The elk stepped out of its own muck and bared its waist-covered teeth at him. A mixture of that toxin and oil ran down the beast's lips and stained its gray, matted chest. Its eyes were just like that of the gator's, bloodshot and spinning backwards in its head, like it was already dead. Its antlers, which glistened like blades, guarded the street in front of it. To get to its head, he'd have to break through those tangled blades. Plant your feet, bud. Richard remembered not only his training, but his recent fight with Luke Motor. He hadn't been in a fight in 7 years, but his instincts hadn't failed him then. When this beast came at him, he'd meet it head on with the artifact blade's full strength. Richard hunched and pointed the sword forward, just as the elk opened its great maw and came within inches of him. Richard thrust the sword forward, and their blades collided. Richard's entire body was smacked. He flew backwards, almost losing his grip on the sword as his back cracked the asphalt. He was dizzy and nauseous, pain reverberating through his entire skeleton. But he brushed it off. Taking the sword in his right hand and pushing himself up on his left, Richard lifted his chest and his head, and he saw that the elk was doing the same thing. Only half standing, its bladed antlers had cracked and were breaking down into shards. Richard tightened his grip, and the artifact blade's aura enveloped his arm. Then the elk roared again, its eyes spinning in 2 different directions as it charged toward him, its hooves pounding the concrete, ready to stab him with the jagged edges of its antlers. Richard flipped the blade so that he was holding it downwards and jumped. He never felt such a rush of energy throughout in his entire life. Even the elk stopped and widened its eyes with amazement as he overtook it and stabbed down. The artifact blade sang through the beast's back and came out its chest, skewering it to the ground. The elk's eyes spun one last time, its mouth falling open and its tongue flopping to one side. Then its weight shifted, and Richard felt it go still beneath him. Above him, the clouds were thickening, blotting out the sun entirely. Across the city, he could hear people screaming for help. Some of them were right in Claymore's tavern, the elk's river of ooze preventing their escape. It was just all so surreal. These things were just tearing through the town of Ark. He'd almost lost his life 3 times today as he raced to escape. And now one was laying at his feet as he drew the blood-covered sword from his body. He was aching, though. The elk's attack must have cracked a few ribs because he could barely stand straight without feeling a numb of pain. That was until the red aura surrounded his chest, and he started to feel vibrations. "Hey, isn't that?" someone said. "That's him all right," said someone else, "the silent giant." Richard turned and limped towards the ooze covering Claymore's circle. Behind him, the elk's body flashed, and he heard it breaking down into that same gooey substance which covered the street behind them. From here, he got a good look at the path before him. Main Street was wrecked, with shards of glass and boards of wood just laying in the middle of the road. Ark Burger was completely caved in. A few flower shops up the street were on fire, and all of this was inaccessible as long as this muck was there. Suddenly, the river lunged towards Richard's ankles. Like leeches, the tar reached out, attempting to ensnare its prey. Instinctively, he stabbed down with the sword. It pierced the tar, and its aura ran into it, burning it up and forming a circle of solid ground. Now the river was sinking away from Richard. No, from the sword. As it held their enemy at bay, the blood of their last victim disintegrated off the pink blade. So, as long as he had this blade, he had some defense. And against their poison, that was good to know. Richard drew the blade from the earth and started waving it over the river, letting its heat burn more and more of the ooze until it started to form a path across the circle. "There's no mistaking it," someone else said. "I can't believe it. That's that silent giant, Richard Renovon." He scoffed. So they did know his name. "Bro, do you know what he is? Look at the blade. See it?" They were talking from the porch of Claymore's Tavern as he cleared a path for them to escape. "Bro, that's a demon knight. A real demon knight." "Listen up, snowbirds. Happy flippin' Establishment Day," the cowboy sneered. A field full of hooded heads shot up at attention, their shoulders stiff with fear. As Luke tried to listen, a hooded man next to him was muttering, of all things, prayers. Really? Luke had no idea people still did that in this world, and what was it going to accomplish exactly? The cowboy continued. "I'm a straightforward businessman. Your dubious mayor, Alfred Merrick, has something that I want. As soon as I get what we came here for, my men and I will be on our way. So, everybody just sit tight and be cool. Or else, this could happen to you." He waved his fingers through the air as he spoke like he was stroking invisible chimes, but instead of music, Luke found the autumn-shaded eyes falling once more upon him and the rifle lowering, now held in two hands. Luke tensed up. He always knew that he could die in Ark, ever since his parents left him here. He just didn't think it would feel the way he was feeling. He'd do anything right now to be anywhere else. "Hey, boss," shouted another man. There were fast footsteps coming across the field. Luke's entire torso was numb, and his mind was fixed on the gun's barrel, staring at him like a little insect. The cowboy's eyes fell, but besides that slight shift, his expression remained entirely even. Finally, he lowered the gun from Luke, turning his head to a stout man with black, wavy hair. "What's the problem, not boss?" "Boss, it's... He was practically heaving. In his hand, he held a flip phone, open to what Luke assumed was a picture. "Here, just look." "If you can't say it out loud, it must not be that bad. Now do your job. I have an example to make." "Look!" There was only one sound in the entire field, and that was the muttering of the very scared man next to Luke. His face was hidden under a bag, but he was wearing a beautiful, bright orange plaid t-shirt. "Hey, Grandpa, shut up, would you?" Luke whispered. But the man went on muttering. A bellowing growl sounded behind them, and both he and the praying man inched forward. Luke's entire body was trembling. As he steadied his breaths, he looked back across the field and saw the cowboy hand the phone back to his right-hand man. He maintained his even temper, but his eyes were, for the first time, wandering. When he spoke, his confident, resolute tone had diminished. "It's a nice album." "Who would have thought? A demon knight. Here. He took out the elk and the gator, boss. The hornets are running from him." "What did you do?" the cowboy asked. Me?" The cowboy stepped up to him, eye to eye. "Well, you were slick enough to build your portfolio just now. Why didn't you spend that time, I don't know, disarming him?" And there was a glint in the wavy-haired man's eyes. "Screw you, Adam. My team split up. There was no way I was going to take on a demon knight by myself." Luke blinked and missed the draw. The man fell to his knees, two hands clutching his throat, eyes wide with horror and shock, as his own blood seeped through his fingers. The cowboy stood over him, blood dripping from one of his two hunting knives. His tone was nonchalant. "We don't use names here, Morgan." Morgan slumped over, his eyes wide, and his legs jerking every few seconds. Soon he was still, and the field was silent. Even the large ogre-looking man standing not far from Luke, a white fox tattooed on his bulky neck, didn't dare move or speak until the cowboy addressed him, flicking the blood off his knife. "Looks like you're the new number 2, he said to the ogre. And to the man next to him, he started barking orders. "Take half these snowbirds to camp, quickly, before the demon knight gets here. Take 15 good men with you and regroup with the others." To the ogre man, he said, "You and I are going to set a trap." The field came to life. The white fox diverged as some dragged Luke to kneel next to other hostages, including the praying man, who was now humming a gospel song. The rest of the white fox were dragging other screaming people away from the field and loading them into their trucks. The cowboy surveyed it all, his eyes settling on the beast still sleeping behind the hostages. "Bile," he shouted. "That's her name," grinning with delight. "As I was saying, people, I'm just a visitor from out of town, here to do some business with your mayor. If it all goes well, you might live. So don't go doing anything stupid, or else." Those autumn leaves fell again on Luke. Luke shut his eyes. 4 blasts rang out. All around him, people were crying, only to have their heads bashed by their captors standing near them. Luke opened his eyes. The cowboy still had his weapon in hand, 2 hands gripping it, his posture perfect. He was studying his work, but he hadn't hit Luke. When Luke turned to his right, he saw a hooded man lying beside him, a grotesque sight. He was riddled with bullets, still as a rock, his bright plaid shirt robbed of its beauty, and now no one heard any prayers said for any of them. Okay. Raise the blade. Trembling, he did as the voice commanded. Like pressing a button, one touch to the grip filled his body with a scalding aura. Like going to sleep, his thoughts dissolved. He could only hear a gurgling, sepulchral voice. "Raise the blade, now." His vision smeared and his body acted without his consent. Almost every shop had been ripped apart, and some were set on fire, just like the homes in the terrace. From one side of Ark to the other, Richard had seen nothing but destruction. And now a bus was flying right at him, and he was surely going to be crushed. Well, it was only half a bus. A huge husk of metal lifted into the air by hornets working together, all making that horrible synchronized sound. That was when he had the feeling. Before that, he'd been fighting in the 4th district of Ark, the Market District. It began at the edge of the Claymore Circle. 4 parallel streets that were home to Ark's businesses, all conjoined in apartment buildings leading up a gently sloping hill where everything was in ruins. Almost every shop had been ripped apart and some had been set on fire, just like the homes in the terrace. The city's statewide evacuation must have failed because the bodies he saw were strewn across the street, from east on the doorstep of Arkburger to west on the corner of Ramsey Medical Center. They were innumerable, torn into bloody pieces. The beasts had come through and pounced upon their prey, eating their fill before they started regurgitating blood, which he could smell coming from the nearby alleys. And now hornets filled the skies, their buzzing loud in his ears. He could hear them at every corner of the street, their voices melding together as the pink, misty aura of the artifact blade swirled near his eardrums. "Come out," he whispered. The bright energy pulsated around him. A dog emerged from the nearest alley, a dog with cysts all over its shoulders, limbs and snout, with skin so puffed up and swollen he could barely spot its eyes. Its nose was shredded as tiny appendages like roots extended out of it, dripping its own blood onto the victim it was dragging. Richard pointed the blade forward, letting its light shine upon the beast. The dog unfurled its jaw and dropped the dead man. Then it leapt through the air, unleashing its long snake tongue and razor-sharp teeth. Its lunge was faster than Richard's swing. The artifact blade struck air, and he felt the beast's breath on his shoulder just before he was knocked to the ground. The dog stood on all fours, its fangs tearing through his flesh and grazing its collarbone. Richard screamed as the beast dragged him backwards across the street. It raised its long paw and brought it down to pin his chest. All the while, its eyelids fluttered and its eyeballs rolled, as if the beast were having a seizure that just wouldn't let up. Richard struggled against it, and while he did, he heard 3 more beasts, their barks identical to the first, emerging from within the alleys from underneath trash cans, crashing through the windows of burning shops. Panicked, Richard raised the artifact blade and jabbed the toothy crossguard into the dog's fluttering eye. It yelped and lurched its head back, giving Richard just enough slack to lift his chest and push it off him. He got to his feet. Now blood seeped from his open shoulder wound. His right arm hung like a rope, still gripping the sword. When he tried to bend his arm, the wound in his shoulder felt like two bones rubbing against each other, and he panted through gritted teeth. 4 cyst-ridden dogs surrounded him, each one similar in color and proportions. If all 4 of them jumped at once, he would be a piece of meat. What could he do? Open your heart. A sudden haze of red covered Richard's eyes. Now it looked as if all 4 dogs had caught a fire, the street around them painted in embers. He blinked and he could see again with his own eyes and feel the pain of his wound with human senses. As the dogs stepped closer and closer to him, they each drooled and licked their lips. The red haze covered his eyes again, and his attention shifted to a flower shop just sitting to his left. Then a burst of inspiration. Richard ran towards it, all 4 dogs lining up as he ran ahead of them with superior speed. The flower shop had shattered stained glass windows, their shards cracking further under his boot until he mounted his foot on the brick siding. When the dogs lunged, he kicked off the building and sailed backwards, high above them. As he neared his landing, he had them all cornered against the brick building, and the sword's energy pulsated in his palm. Raise the blade. As soon as he landed, he slashed forward, and from the edge of the pink steel, a cloud of vapor formed into an arc of red light. It flew like a bullet towards the 4 dogs, its wide length leaving them no room for escape. Through red-tinted eyes, he watched with satisfaction as their bodies were cleaved in half, just before the flower shop exploded, spilling fire onto the street. After that, he nearly fell over. His reddened eyes watched the cascading flames for just a few seconds before he blinked again and saw with human eyes. Oh no, what have I done? Help us, yelled someone far ahead. The cry reached only Richard's ears. With his free left hand, he grasped his bitten shoulder and hobbled towards the noise. As he cleared Market Street of any remaining beasts, each one falling with just one strike of the sword, he passed Ramsey Medical Center. Though the scene outside was bloody, he could see the hospital doors were still locked. Continuing past it, he came to the westernmost point of Ark, crowned by 5 large skyscrapers, known as the box office block. 2 outer buildings stood facing one another like pillars, while the other 3 buildings were linked together, closing in a plaza that was blocked by an electronic iron gate. Right now, there was a roadblock just before the gates. A squad of police officers were firing shots into the sky, with the tips of the tall buildings in view. A small swarm of hornets were hovering above them, cackling with laughter. They swayed to avoid the bullets, and each shot only seemed to excite them more. What the trail? One of the cops yelled. Richard leapt atop a squad car, facing the hornets. 3 of them flew down at Richard no differently than those dogs, dripping their acidic poison. Are you crazy? Another cop yelled at him. Richard stepped back and turned his shoulders, slicing through the air just as the hornets reached him. 3 hornets hit the ground in pieces. 2 more flew over his head and came towards the back of his neck. He jumped off the squad car and adjusted his stance on the ground. The tip of the blade met them as they fluttered down, and 2 cuts reduced them to spark plugs, then to muck. Then he heard a sound. Looking up, he saw 10 more hornets circling them. The cops fired, and Richard caught them glaring down at the men. But instead of attacking, they flapped their wings harder and lifted themselves higher. Richard kept his eyes on them as they fluttered away, their chirps vanishing with a gust of wind. For a moment, everything was silent. He turned to the officers who were staring at him in utter disbelief. As he did, he recognized someone among them, Sam Hansen, the chief of police. Richard recognized him by the landing strip at the base of his long chin, much like a dog's snout. Even now, as he approached Richard unarmed, he seemed poised for battle. Who are you? He demanded. Richard Renovan, Phoenix District. Hansen's eyes fell to the sword. What is that thing? Richard looked down at the sweltering object in his right hand, heating the air around him. Every officer stared at it as he would expect them to, like he was holding a furnace. It's an artifact blade, he told the chief. Chief looked like he'd been slapped. Why do you have it? Then he heard the sound again. Richard and the cops looked over the rooftop of a nearby building. From the eastern side of Ark, 20 hornets appeared. They were carrying something. What the trail is that? Richard muttered. Half a bus, Hansen answered. He was right. Richard saw a thick, jagged husk of metal gripped in their 80 insect limbs. They flew fast. In only seconds, they would drop the huge metal on the road and crush them. No, that wasn't like them. Richard wagered they were going to scatter the people with the bus, and as they staggered to their feet, picked them all off with their stingers. The officers were already taking cover, but Richard knew he had to stand between them and the attack. The sounds of their chirping deafened him, his view of the sky now precariously obstructed. What are you doing, man? Shouted a cop. I got this, he promised. He was unsure of how to attack or defend something so large, though. It was twice the size of the elk, and that thing had nearly shattered him. Stand down, civilian, barked Hansen. I got this. Get out of here, Richard bellowed. It might have been pure adrenaline carrying him through, or perhaps the aura rushing out of the eye. If he was going to die, he wouldn't make it easy for them. The hornets loosened their grips, and the bus started to fall. A feeling engulfed Richard's mind, a plan of action, something he would have never thought of on his own. Raise the blade. Trembling, he did it as the voice commanded, and as he did, it was like pressing a button. Now his body acted without his consent. His knees bent and his sword arm extended out. His left arm craned back and his hand made the shape of an animal's claw. From the eye of the sword, the red aura swirled and formed into a ball, which began to take on a thicker, more corporeal form. The blade lost all its pink color, now blazing like a fire iron. The orb around him became a furnace that melted the nearest squad car. Richard hoped that the police had fled. He'd lost all control. The aura raged not just around him, but under his skin. His body became rock solid and his muscles tightened and throbbed, but he felt like he was standing inside of an oven. When that steel surface of the bus met the surface of his orb, Richard watched it sink through, charring its surface, meeting the point of the artifact blade. He just pushed it through, feeling it tear through all the metal and burn it to cinders. The bus imploded, its pieces crashing all around them. Then, as it settled, his arm moved in a horizontal cut, splitting the surface of the orb. He saw the hornets hovering not far above, shock upon their ugly, fanged faces. His body launched itself into the air, and with one blazing cut, a beam of light tore through the air and incinerated every single fluttering beast in a blaze of fire. He hit the ground and rolled, watching the flames dissolve into mist. What's up, Andrew? I thought I saw somebody commented. Thank you so much for tuning in. All right. Very good. We're down to the last couple pages for tonight, so I'll just go ahead and finish this up. If you guys are enjoying it, drop a like, drop a heart, give the video a share. If you want to click the link in the description and go to Amazon and purchase, you're welcome to. All righty. Wanted to share a little bit real quick about what it was like to write this. You know, it was my dream for like 9 years to write a superhero novel. And I was pretty sure I knew exactly what story I was going to tell. I was going to tell the story of Richard Renovan, which you guys are about 70 pages into now. It was all about a guy who was struggling with his alter ego and was living in a little Western town, unsure of where he came from or why he was there. And, all about him, you can see this evidence of some life trauma, this very traumatic experience that happened out in the mysterious world of the story, which would reveal itself more and more as he starts to remember things. And it's a fun story. There's a lot of secrets in it. Unpacking all the secrets as I go through the drafts has always been one of the all the secrets, all the conspiracies has always been one of the most fun parts of this one. And also the characters. There's a lot of characters in this. You hear a lot about Richard in these early chapters. You hear a lot about Luke, but there's a ton of characters that for years were so interesting to me that I had to just, commit myself to making this book the one. And then around 2019, I finally started writing the thing. And while we were in lockdown, seems a while ago now, this was kind of, my lockdown story. This was what I basically spent the pandemic doing. That and, trying to launch a writing career through One True Promotion with good old Andrew. It's so funny going through the chapters of this book in editing, in, emails, in workshopping, and in promos when I would show you guys the early stages of it back in the day. All the pandemic stuff, it seems so current, but it's crazy to think about that now as like it wasn't that long ago, but it feels like it was, another time. We've all kind of moved on to another phase of life now. And but yeah, this was my pandemic book, and I was really hooked on that idea of a person wrestling against his own inner demon. I think going through a life trauma, which the whole world was going through at the time, I think that can really bring your inner demons to light in a way that you have to confront them, or they'll just take over you. And I think that a lot of us, can recall that was really the struggle during that time in our country and the world. So, it was really interesting to just see this character become so much more real once I finally started writing about him. But going through this chapter, specifically the action chapters, man, I did not know how to write action. Of course, I've made some improvements since then. I've written about 3 more drafts of 3 more novels. 3 more novel drafts since then. And, I have a whole different approach to how I write now. It's a natural part of the process. But I remember it was tricky in the beginning to figure out how to really capture the second by second, experiences of somebody who was using an artifact to fight demon monsters that were just swarming and attacking the town that he was in. I pictured it as an attack that just wouldn't relent, which is why, so many pages of this chapter were committed to it, just enough to really capture that feeling of, being stuck in this situation, this devolving situation that's getting worse and worse by the second. And if you don't do something about it, the whole town is going to be burned down in a matter of, hours, or it feels like even minutes. So it was really interesting, though, to work with the workshoppers and figure out, what were the key moments to highlight here. There was a lot that had to get cut, but what were the key moments that were, worthy of keeping? And I always enjoyed that moment when he jumped up on top of the cop car and the cops are like, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Chill, I got this." Even though inside he doesn't know what the heck he's doing. He has to rely on the inner voice to figure out how to use this thing still. But to me, like in my vision of it, that was such a, such a epic moment. It was almost like a Spider-Man moment where you see the main character figuring out their powers and trying to step out in front of the crowd and really, do something about this very big problem. And that's kind of, what the series is about. It's about wrestling against, demons internally, but also externally, everything that the world throws at you. So really was a very fun project to work on. And I was very fortunate to have the help of my wife since before we were married, and very fortunate to have the help of Andrew and everybody at One True Promotion, Nick, Brielle, everybody. But yeah, if you are enjoying The Children of Arc, which was, the result of many years of dreaming and labor. I don't know if the link even posted. Let me check the link again. No, I don't think it did. So I know what I'll do about that. I'll just pop it in because I am a user of Facebook. I'll just pop it in directly. Here we go. See if that works. Yep, that worked. So if you decide you want to purchase the book and see more of it for yourself, you're welcome to click that link. Okay, let's wrap this up and get everybody to bed. Appreciate you guys staying up with me. Really do. If you're enjoying this, give me a like, a heart, whatever. All right. Richard needed food and water. His body was screaming in pain, and his throat was completely dry. He felt like the artifact blade's intense heat resting over his entire body was just scalding. It seemed as if that was the only thing sustaining him, though. The mist began to dissipate, and he saw San Hansen approaching him cautiously. Richard felt no fear from Hansen, for he'd just begun to understand the artifact blade, which still glimmered as he held onto it. A presence had entered him. Prayer, Roger had told him. When you pray, Richard, a presence enters you. We can only do so much, but his presence can do anything. This was nothing like that. Richard couldn't devise a prayer if his life depended on it. Though he'd inherited enough power to battle mankind's predator from one side of the city to the other, he felt terror inside. The presence inside him was hateful and violent. It amazed him that right when that bus fell on him, he hadn't turned and attacked the cops as well, because he felt like he could rip apart anything that came near him right now. The artifact blade wasn't just a tool. And these beasts rolling their eyes back and charging at him with gashes in their throats weren't living beasts at all. He understood laying there exactly what mankind's predator really was. And next to him, the ruby pommel stopped glowing. The eye had closed. Richard felt that presence somewhat loosening as San Hansen reached down. Take my hand. Richard took a few steady breaths, moving his arms to ensure they were entirely under his control. When he felt safe enough to do so, he reached up, and for the first time since he started fighting, he saw his sword hand. Wet blood streamed over a bony surface, skin torn in and grouped into wet red clods, dripping more blood. The scars he had carried into Ark were nothing compared to this. He was truly deformed now. This was the hand of a rotting corpse, not a living man. Yet here it was, attached to his arm. Come on, grab my hand, Hansen ordered still. But Richard couldn't bring himself to. Instead, he rolled over and pushed himself up as Hansen stepped back. Despite all the damage his body had endured, the pain was minimal. It seemed that the presence could not only fill him with agony, but dull its sting as well. Richard looked over Hansen's shoulder to see that every last officer had survived. Finally, he'd managed to help someone. But they were all gawking at him. Not one of them was smiling. And Richard suddenly felt quite vulnerable. The gates to the box office block had opened. The man joining Hansen was short and thin, but a mob of very well-dressed bodyguards flanked him on all sides. Might I have a word with you? The little man said to Ark. The ocean in Richard's eyes met a sandy shoreline. He had wrinkled skin and brown hair combed with such sublime precision, not one strand went astray. His suit matched the color of his eyes. His collar was buttoned under a crimson red tie, and clipped to his lapel was a golden name badge. It read, in thin black letters, Alfred E. Merrick, Mayor. Richard had never seen the current mayor of Ark before. He'd heard him on the radio, but unlike Elliot Wagner, the man rarely showed his face. His broadcasts were marked by frequent words of encouragement to the people. So he began to recognize the mayor's voice. Dead already, they call us. Is that true, people of Ark? Are we a dead people, he would say. He also had a smooth yet curt manner of shutting down heckles and interruptions, often commanding conversation without ever raising his voice. You say Ark is on its last legs? Let's look at the facts. I should warn you, I've checked the books of every business in our city-state, and I have a feeling the great people of this town are about to surprise you. Now he was here, his eyes darting between Richard and the blade. Around them, the suited men and women stood and frowned like stone statues. One in particular, the largest and most imposing of the group, with a cleft chin and hair done in cornrows, glared at Richard with stony intensity. It reminded him of a dog guarding its master. Perhaps there is a God, the mayor said. What else but divine intervention would summon a demon knight to our little city-state just when we were in need of him? What's your point? Richard blankly asked, his voice strained from the pain of his injuries. Well, my point is, who are you? Who sent you to us? Nobody, Richard said. I'm from the Phoenix district. My name is Richard. The mayor took a step back, his eyes probing Richard. The little man pointed a frail, trembling finger at the artifact blade. That once belonged to the famous demon knight Corey Belmont. How did you come by it? It was given to me. By whom? I don't know. But don't you realize what it is? A perturbed yet impressed expression fell on the mayor's face. You're connected to it now. Contained within that steel is a demon, Richard interrupted. So you know. You're aware of the true nature of mankind's predator. I didn't know it at first, but it's in my head. It talks to me. I thought I was going crazy, but I know what's happening. The mayor seemed to drop his sternness just a bit, moving towards Richard with a gentle, reassuring voice. The artifact blade imprisons the demon. Through contact with it, properties of the original beast are channeled into your human body. However, unlike those possessed by demons, which become the very beasts you are fighting, this demon is not in you. As soon as you set down this steel weapon, you are freed of its presence. Richard took that in, but he wasn't so assured. Even now, as it lay on the ground with its eye closed, he felt he could hear it whispering to him. Its heat was still burning him under his skin. Come back, Richard. Things have quieted down, said the mayor. We have you to thank for that, Mr. Renovon. How did this happen? Richard asked him. That was an impressive maneuver you just pulled, but you clearly have a lot to learn about this weapon, Mr. Renovon. The pain you are in now is the result of poor control over its power. In fact, if the demon knows your body will not survive a certain attack, it will hold itself back to protect its wielder. After all, you're no good to it dead. Try picking it up. See if it's still hot. Richard both hated and loved that idea. With what he was feeling now, both mentally and physically, he never wanted to touch that grip again. And yet, just like when he stared at the warehouse door, he was drawn to it. There was a rush of energy that flowed through him. He knew that the pain he was feeling would diminish when the aura touched his body again. So, Richard knelt and reached for the grip. Sure enough, it had cooled. Do you know what it's called? The mayor asked. Richard shook his head. Belmont called it the Calipar. For that moment, like discerning the lyrics of a song, he could hear the voice in his head speaking that exact words, introducing itself to him. Well, it's nice to know your name. Pardon? The mayor said. Nothing. We need to put him to work, said the cleft-chinned man over Merrick's shoulder. His eyes were hidden behind sunglasses, but still Richard could detect a gruff animosity in his every word. All righty, and we will stop there for this evening. So, oh boy, I need a swig of water after that. Went for a good amount of time tonight. I tried to give you some substantial content. That was kind of the cornerstone. You know, a lot of what you just heard was sort of the impetus of the whole idea. You know, apart from the exposition in the beginning of the novel, those scenes of him fighting in the city and meeting the mayor for the first time and realizing that because he's using this artifact, he has a very real demon talking to him in his head. All of that was, you know, the foundation upon which this story was built. And particularly the hand, his bony, you know, like, so in last night's reading, when he was first taking control of the hilt, I said that he got burned 3 times. And then, of course, he's been holding that same fiery object the entire time he's been fighting. So the description of his hand, when he finally looks at it after a few hours of fighting, is just hideous. He can see through to the bones. The flesh is you know, swollen and torn. It's covered in blood and all kinds of terrible stuff. That really is like, you know, it's a gruesome image, but it's a very important image, because it's like, when we think of the superhero, you know, we think of Spider-Man or, well, let's go with Spider-Man. We think of Spider-Man having gotten bitten by the spider, waking up and realizing that he's got muscles, that he's got all these, you know, gymnastic capabilities now, that he can shoot webs out of his wrists in one movie at least. And it's always such a cool revelation. You know, the main character's struggle doesn't start until the perils of a life-fighting crime start to interfere with, you know, their real lives. But until then, the discovery of the powers, you know, that's the fun part. That's the cool part. You know, they jump around the rooftops going, woo, like that. But I really wanted to just take a slightly different approach to that, where, you know, you see that Richard has some very awesome power in the palm of his hand. These demon monsters, like it was said, they're taking bullets, they're taking knives, nothing is bringing them down, but he's dropping them one body after another. I mean, he's single-handedly pushing back on this invasion. But when he looks at what that's done just to his sword hand, he is absolutely just, burned and charred and halfway destroyed. And, he feels this moment of fear, realizing that, yes, he's gained power, but there's something dark and hideous inside of him starting to, already it's starting to work on him, starting to work on his head and his body. So it's a struggle between light and dark within one person and out in the world. And it's been a very fun series to work on. So if any of that stuff interests you, I'm glad you're here. Thank you for listening. And again, one last time, want to encourage you to check out the Amazon page. For Kindle, it's only $3.99. All right. Well, do follow One True Promotions pages, if you would, on YouTube, on Facebook. That's the brand name that sponsored the creation of this, the creation of this book. So if you would like to support myself and the other guys and gals that are working at this fine brand name, just please follow everybody's pages. There's Andrew Bast, Nicholas Georgel, Laura Lucas Savage, Brielle Elise, Papaccio, all writers, all artists, all amazing talents. Thank you guys for supporting. I'm going to leave you with this quick promo, and we'll see you next time.